Good afternoon. My name is Laurel Ferguson. I'm with the Safety Department at Paychex, and I'm going to be your presenter today for safety for staffing agencies. I work for the Paychex Safety Department, but Advanced Partners, who you are affiliated with, is part of our Paychex family, and so they've asked me to put this presentation on for you today. So let's get started with this. On our agenda for today is going to be in four parts. So Ellen, if you could advance, thank you. We're going to start by identifying hazards. And this is a general information about safety and how to identify hazards in a workplace. But then we're going to break it down into more specifics for how it applies to staffing agencies in terms of assessing the workplaces for the safety of your employees. And then we're going to talk about how you communicate with your employees about safety issues and what your requirements are. And then finally, we're going to wrap up with a little bit of information on injuries and how to report claims. So, the issues that you face are very diverse, and it is the law. Federal and state laws have minimum requirements. So we want to talk, a little bit about these four items so that so that you can have the information and be armed with information that you need in order to keep your employees safe in the workplace. So let's start with identifying your safety needs. Ellen, if you could advance the slide. We want to talk about the general concerns. Again, this is general information applicable to almost any industry. And then, in the next session, we're going to break it down a little bit more in depth in terms of what you need to know. So who really needs to think about safety? Any business and industry, regardless of how many employees you have, is required to comply with the OSHA and the safety regulations that are on the books. Safety industries or safety concerns are really specific to your industry: manufacturing, warehouse, construction, shipping, landscaping. Any one of these industries that you see here on your screen is something that there are OSHA regulations that apply, and therefore affect you if your employees work in any of these industries. So let's take a closer look at manufacturing, construction, warehouse, and landscaping as a whole. So on the average, these industries account for about 18% of all worker deaths. Just, people that die in the workplace, 18% of them are in these particular types of industries. And OSHA is frequently in these industries, and the general industry and the construction regulations apply to these types of activities. And when you have employees that are working in these types of industries, you need to think about, are there going to be overhead cranes that are used in the facility? The Department of Labor, cited staffing providers, in these types of industries, specifically in Huntsville, Alabama. After a temporary employee fell into a sewer line and suffered a fatal injury during a trench collapse. So, overhead cranes, trenching and shoring, emergency action and fire prevention, electrical safety, fall protection. These are all different types of industry or different types of issues that these types of industries have to be concerned with. We also have things like first aid and forklifts. Are there going to be material handling equipment that they're going to be working around or actually driving, and they have to be licensed to do that? Hazard communication and chemicals. Are there any industrial chemicals in the facility that your employees will be exposed to? In which case, then hazard communication regulations and training and information on safety data sheets applies. Lockout, tagout. Will they be working with specific pieces of equipment? And when should they call somebody else to fix it or repair it or clear a jam from it? What are their requirements for de-energizing these types of pieces of equipment and machinery? Your machine guarding requirements. The employees have to know where the guards are on the machine and what their purpose is. They have to know when to wear personal protective equipment and tools and how to report injuries. All of these things are of concern in these types of industries. So we have, the responsibility for the work site to be maintained free of recognized hazards as part of the regulations that apply to these industries and that apply to you. So let's take a closer look at healthcare related industries, because that's the next one of the next larger industries. If you have employees that are going into these types of doctors' offices, veterinary offices, dental offices, maybe they're doing cleaning in these types of offices, there are specific regulations that apply to these types of industries as well. Biological waste. What do you do with your sharps, the needles that are used for your company, and how do you handle human blood and body fluid? Because 1 out of every 40 adults in the United States has something that's communicable through blood or body fluid. Does that business have any compressed gases? What's their emergency plan? What chemicals do they use? What personal protective equipment is required to be used when that employee is working there? Reporting and testing, X-ray, different types of X-ray equipment. Is it traditional? Is it phosphor plate? Is it, digital X-ray? What are the types of things? And there are other safety concerns in these types of businesses, including ergonomics, lifting for back safety, slips, trips, and falls. These are all general types of things in the healthcare industry that we have to be concerned about. And for the next class of companies, we have food-related industries. Again, your emergency action. If the building's on fire, what do you do? Where do you send your employees? How do you know that everyone is out safely? Injury reporting. If somebody cuts themselves with a knife or on a sharp piece of glass or something, what is that process? Cleaning chemicals, personal protective equipment, slips, trips, knife safety, back safety. These are all types of things that in the food industry there is concern about. Again, for your employees as well as the employee, the full-time employees of the company that employs them. For an office setting, again, your emergency action, your injury reporting, your housekeeping, and your ergonomics. In a lot of cases, people that work in offices do drive from place to place. So if your employees are going to be driving, do they need to be licensed for a specific type of vehicle? Or, do they have the appropriate driver's licenses and insurance and things like that for their cars if they're going to be, going from one business to the next, to the next, to the next. So again, those are types of concerns that we have for an office. So in general, that's what we're talking about. But let's talk a little bit about assessing the safety needs for you, and what do you need to know about the safety for your employees that are going to be working in these types of industries. So first, we want to talk a little bit about the first level probing questions. What are the hazards that my employees are going to be exposed to specifically in your workplace? And will my employees be exposed to any chemicals? And if so, what are those chemicals? What do my employees need to know about them? Are they going to be corrosive or are they flammable? And, there's different ways to handle those types of things. What personal protective equipment will my employees be required to wear? Will they need safety glasses? Will they need gloves, respirators, fall protection, hearing protection? Are they going to be required to wear non-slip shoes or steel-toed work boots or anything like that? Hard hats. What is the type of personal protective equipment that is required in your businesses? And what will my employees need to be provided with? Will you provide that to them, or do I have to? What is it that they need to know about that? Is there training that is specific to that type of personal protective equipment that my employees are going to need? And generally with hearing protection, respirators, and fall protection, that is the case. What specific safety training do you require of employees who are doing the job that my employees are doing? Are they required to have crane safety or confined space entry training or tool safety training? Are they required to have forklift training if they're going to be driving a forklift? Because you have to be licensed and certified to drive the lift, just like you have to be licensed and certified to drive your car on the road. Is there, any kind of driving training, or are they going to go up in a scissors lift or an aerial lift? What exposures do they have to silica and other chemicals that requires training? And again, do you provide that training, or are you expecting us to have our employees trained when they get to you? And that type of training may be built into the cost of your contract with that employer. For the focused questions on the next section, we're talking about the specific machinery for manufacturing or construction or warehouse or landscaping, and who's responsible for making sure that those machines have the appropriate guards that are going to protect my employees, if they have to operate that type of equipment. Are there work at height issues? Again, will my employees be climbing on ladders or using a scissors lift or a man lift or an aerial lift? And again, there's very specific training that has to go with those types of things, and who is going to provide that training? Do my employees need to know how to inspect that equipment, or is somebody else going to be responsible for inspecting it? Do you have any forklifts on premises? Again, forklifts have licensing requirements. Will my employees need to know how to drive one? Do you ever use cranes or similar hoisting equipment? And then, for those types of things, do you barricade the area around the crane so nobody can walk underneath the raised load of a crane? Or do you have other types of training and warning systems in place, and how do my employees know what those are? Are there chemicals, compressed or controlled gases or fuels that you use? Fuel tanks. Are they going to be, putting fuel into a tank or a container? Or are they going to be dealing with any kind of sprays or flammable liquids or pesticides or anything else that they need to be concerned about with hazard communication and chemical information? What types of, again, personal protective equipment is specific to your industry, and do you provide that training? And again, your emergency action plan. Will you train my employees on the elements of your plan so they know where your exit doors are and where they're supposed to go at your facility to meet up, when the alarm sounds, so that you can account for everyone, including my employees? Because, I want to make sure that my employees are safe. It's the right thing to do. For the medical, dental, or laboratory clients, when we get down into those specific, focused, probing questions for the next slide, how often do you, Ellen, I think we're behind a slide here. Thank you. How often do you perform bloodborne pathogens training? It is required to be done every year if you have exposure to human blood or body fluid. Will my employees be involved in any kind of patient care where that exposure is going to occur, or moving waste materials from place to place where that type of exposure could occur? Do you have a written exposure control plan? Because every medical, dental, veterinary office is required to have one. And what types of chemicals are you using on site? Do you sterilize your pieces of equipment and your tools? And will my employees have exposure to those types of chemicals? Are there any compressed gas cylinders, oxygen, nitrous, any liquid nitrogen that a dermatologist's office would use? Anything like that my employees are going to be involved with? Again, these are the specific questions you need to ask these types of industries. Again, personal protective equipment, emergency action, and then, lasers, x-rays, similar types of pieces of equipment that my employees might be involved with that they would need to know about for the hazards of that type of operation. For the next slide, those focused and probing questions for the food services industry. Again, do you have proper knife safety? Do you have requirements and training for people that use knives? And is it a serrated knife? Is it a straight blade? Is it a electronic knife or a saw for meat cutting? Something like that. What are the types of chemicals you use for cleaning and sanitizing? Is it straight bleach? Is it a bleach and water solution? Is it something else that you use? Again, my employees are going to be required to or have exposure to that type of thing. They need to know about that type of thing. Emergency action plans, accident reporting, if they cut themselves, what are they supposed to do? Where do they go? Who do they see? Kind of thing. And what kind of medical services do you provide? Personal protective equipment. Will my employees be required to lift barrels or boxes or kegs of beer or soda or compressed gas cylinders and move them from place to place for soda machines? Or are they going to be required to lift cases of beer or soda or something like that and move them around? So again, back safety and safe lifting training may be required. What kind of kitchen slicers or other tools, dishwashing, ovens, things like that my employees will be able to or be responsible for operating. And what happens if that piece of equipment breaks down? Will my employees be trained on who to talk to or who to see rather than trying to fix it themselves? And then what slip trip hazards do you have in your workplace? Are your carpet tiles all the way they need to be? Are there stairs, and are they appropriately marked? Do they have guardrails if it's more than, 4 steps kind of thing? What have we got in place there that my employees will be exposed to? So for those employee responsibilities, we have to figure out and determine which of the safety regulations and standards apply. And that's really based on that company's industry, the operations that they have, and the hazards that are involved. The company that your employee is reporting to is required to provide a safe and healthful workplace. But you, as the employer and the responsible person for that employee, are responsible to make sure that the employees get the training and the information on hazards that they are required to have. Consider, would you let your child or your young adult or your teenager work at this particular location? And if you would, then chances are it's safe. And if you wouldn't let your child work there, then maybe we need to talk about the hazards and how to address those hazards, with that employer or with that contract, so that you can make sure that your employees are protected. In the next section, we're going to talk about communicating safety information to your employees. What do you and they need to discuss together in order to keep them safe? First, I want to go through a little bit of information about what OSHA is. OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, and it's a division of the U.S. Department of Labor. And you have labor regulations that regulate, how many hours a day you can work and what types of hazards, teenagers and other employees, other young employees can be, exposed to. And you've got, health and safety regulations all under this Department of Labor. And OSHA is the health and safety regulatory agency. Now, since 1970, workplace fatalities have declined more than 65%, and workplace injury rates have declined more than 67% since 1970, when OSHA was enacted as an agency. And much of that declination is attributed to the establishment and the intervention of OSHA. Now, again, all private sector employees and employers are covered under the OSHA regulations, and there are different state programs that may also be applicable. California has its own set of regulations. Michigan, Minnesota. There are 26 states that have regulations that are equally as stringent or more stringent than the OSHA regulations. So you or I, or whoever is dealing with the safety for your employees, has to be aware of not only the federal regulations, but if there are state regulations that apply to that industry in that particular state. Now, self-employed individuals, people that only have themselves as employees, they don't have to worry about this. Farms that only employ immediate family members, they're not subjected to OSHA. Public employees in state and local governments, if you're going to send them to work for a municipality, that's a different type of OSHA group than this under the Division of U.S. Labor. So again, there's exemptions for those types of communities and types of workplaces, but for the most part, everybody that you're going to talk to and contract with is covered under the OSHA standards. So there are different types of OSHA regulations. There are general industry regulations. It's a whole set of regulations that apply. And there are construction standards, again, another whole set of regulations that apply specific to the construction industry. And then the maritime and the agriculture also have their own set of regulations. So in general industry, we have categories of regulations. We have walking and working surfaces that deal with slips and trips and housekeeping and ladder use. We've got means of egress, which is your emergency action and your evacuation and your exit doors and your exit signs and the paths to the door. We've got, powered platforms and lifts. Will they be using a scissors lift or an aerial lift? Do they have specific ventilation systems to take care of dust or some other type of airborne contaminant? And those are your health and environmental controls. personal protective equipment for hazardous materials, compressed gas for general environmental controls, forklifts. All of these are types of issues that are covered in the general industries. What specific chemical usages, electrical safety, machine guarding, fire protection. All of these are topics that there are regulations that have to be enacted or that are enacted, and companies have to comply with these if they apply to that company. Now, again, not every company has the same set of regulations. So why do we do this? Really, we're talking about making sure that for the OSHA compliance and for your safety, we want to make sure that your employees go home at the end of the workday with all 10 fingers and all 10 toes and their hearing and their vision intact. So, we have these regulations for personal protective equipment and for hazard recognition and things like that, so that your employees can be protected. And it's the right thing to do. It really is. But also, there are benefits to your company and to the company that your employees are reporting to. There's a lower cost for workers' compensation. If you don't have as many injuries as you would if you didn't have a good safety program, then your workers' comp rates go up, as you are probably quite familiar with. You don't have to have employee replacement or a lot of turnover. You can send the employee for a long-term contract week after week after week to the same place, so that they don't have to go to a different facility because they were hurt and now they can't use their right hand or something like that. Now we've got to make sure that we get an employee replacement in there. The company that they report to, again, is responsible primarily for the safety of the individual, but citations and fines can potentially come back to you as the main employer, the responsible employer for that person, as well as to the company where they're reporting to. You get higher productivity rates, and you have a positive company image. If I work for you and I'm sent to different industries across the board, and I get safety training and I feel good about my job because I know that I'm going to be safe there, I'm going to recommend to my friends that they come and work for you too. So that's a positive company image. And the opposite is true as well. If you have a negative company image, you're not going to be able to attract the high quality employees that you would normally do if you have that positive company image. So for the next section, we're going to talk about reporting your injuries and your workers' compensation and insurance policy and how this all fits together. So for your OSHA reporting standards, all companies have to report to OSHA for if they have certain industries, and if they are let me start over there. All companies have to keep track of the accidents and injuries that occur to their staff, regardless of who they are or what industry they're in. If they have 11 or more employees on the payroll and they are under certain categories, again, construction, manufacturing, retail and warehousing, nursing homes, those types of industries have very specific regulations. If they have 20 or more employees, then they have to electronically report their accidents and injuries into OSHA, and they have to do that before the end of this week for the injury rates from last year. Now, all companies have to report to OSHA within 8 hours if there's any kind of fatality at the workplace. If somebody dies on at the workplace, they have to report that to OSHA within 8 hours. If there's an injury that causes the loss of an eye or an amputation, or the employee is hospitalized, they're not just sent to the emergency room, but they're admitted into the hospital, then within 24 hours, you have to call OSHA and report those injuries. Now, again, the company that the employee reported to is required to do that reporting, but because they're your employee, you are also required to make that call into OSHA if it's one of your employees that this happens to. So we have, your OSHA record keeping that is required for you, but also for these requirements for fatalities, in-plant hospitalizations, amputations, and loss of eye, to contact OSHA if there's a problem. For your workplace injuries, the steps to take, The first thing when an injury happens is your medical attention is primary. We want to get the employee the medical attention that they need or want. If the employee is hurt seriously enough, we're going to call an ambulance. If it's a basic first aid kind of thing, I cut my finger, I put a Band-Aid on it, I went back to work. That's a first aid incident. You still need to give them the basic first aid, but you don't necessarily have to send them to the hospital or the clinic for that type of thing. Once that injury is medically treated, we need to clean up the workplace, because again, if there's blood or if there's body fluid there, we've got regulations that are enacted that say how to treat that blood and body fluid, how to clean it up properly, because again, 1 out of every 40 adults has something that's communicable, so we want to make sure that we don't have any cross-contamination. And then reestablish the normalcy in the workplace. Put the machines back in place and running, making sure that, everyone is calmed down and the workplace gets back to a normal operation. Then if needed, you do that reporting to OSHA within 8 or 24 hours, and then you contact your workers' compensation company. And they may have you fill out specific injury reports that are their types of first reports of injury. And if it's, again, a minor first aid, then you can use the standard accident reporting form that you have in your safety manual. And then if you have to keep record-keeping logs, then those injuries have to go on your record-keeping log within 6 days. And again, at the end of the calendar year, those logs get reported back to OSHA if you have 20 or more employees on your payroll. So really, it is your responsibility. If a workplace injury is reported, that's greater than a first aid injury, it's recorded on the log, it's reported to your workers' compensation insurance agency, and they will take the ball from there to pay for any medical treatment, that type of thing. If you're self-insured to a certain extent, then you need to make sure that you cover those types of things for your employees. If it's a basic first aid incident, again, I cut my finger, I put a Band-Aid on it, I went back to work, make sure that the incident is at least documented, and you're required to keep those logs and those accident reports for a minimum of 5 years. If the work-related injury is delayed, so let's say they didn't report it to you, but it happened in the workplace. So again, if it's a first aid injury, I cut my hand the other day. You can see the Band-Aid that I've got on it. Somebody asks you about it, or asks me about it. Yeah, I cut my hand at my workplace the other day. It wasn't a big deal. I put a Band-Aid on it, went back to work. Again, you still want to document that incident, even if the injury was delayed. If it's greater than a first aid injury, I hurt my back the other day when I was lifting at the workplace that you sent me to, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse. I didn't report it at the time. Again, the first call is to your workers' compensation insurance agency, and they will make a determination. They're going to ask other employees around where that incident happened. Did the employee say anything about hurting their back? Did the employee say, well, I was bowling the other night and I strained my back when I threw the ball, kind of thing, but I'm going to report it as a workplace accident. It's that type of thing that your workers' compensation company gets involved with, and then they'll do that type of investigation. Now, they may ask you to do that investigation, in which case then you need to talk with your employees and talk with your contractor, and talk with some of the employees that person was working with. If you're unsure if the injury was work-related, then again, report it on your OSHA log until you know differently. And then again, report that you're not sure if it's work-related, or you suspect that it's not work-related. The employee was in a car accident and has a bruised shoulder, but now they've gone to the workplace the following day, where their car all dented up, and said that it happened at work. So you suspect fraud. In that kind of case, again, get the workers' compensation insurance company involved and tell them you suspect that it is not really a workplace accident and why you suspect that. And again, they'll do that investigation. But until they determine that it is not work-related, a work relationship is always assumed to be there. So it's always considered to be work-related unless we can prove otherwise. So the consequences, if you have workplace injuries any injury that requires medical treatment over a certain dollar amount is going to affect your workers' compensation insurance rates. How much or how little depends on the severity of the workplace or the severity of the injury. If you cut your hand and you get stitches versus you've cut your finger off, huge difference in severity of the injury. So you have to, your workplace is going to establish a specific reputation among clients and among your employees and workers if your injury rates are high. And that could, again, affect the attraction of good workers. It could affect the attraction of new clients for you, and the retention of your existing clients if your employees are not properly trained and informed, and it was your responsibility to do that. There is a workers' compensation company watch list or cancellation issue. If your workers' compensation rates are too high, then your policy could be placed in what we call a risk pool, in which case then you have very high rates, or it could be canceled altogether, and then you would have to go into the state fund, which could potentially have a much higher rate for your workers' compensation. And if that occurs, then what happens is your company has to enact a safety program. You have to write a safety manual. You have to do very specific safety trainings with the with your employees. And number 4 here, that's what we call the state code rule implementation. So each state has that. Next slide, please, Ellen. Each state has their state workers' compensation insurance pool of people that they insure, and if the rates are over a certain modification rate, then that state pool is going to require you to again have a safety inspection that is by one of their vetted consultants, and your company will have to pay for that. You have to write a safety manual in a program, and if you don't have the facilities to do that, you're going to have to hire a consultant to do that, and that can be quite expensive. You have to document trainings, not only for those that are required by law, but also those that your workers' compensation insurance company is going to require of you. So maybe if you have a lot of back injuries, they are going to require that you do back safety training with everyone, even though it might not be required by law under the OSHA regulations. Because you're in that risk pool, or the state code rule, or under the state code rules, you're going to have to do that training with all of your employees, and you have to document that. And your workers' compensation company is going to follow up with you, the state insurance fund, and do periodic inspections and periodic audits of you. And you have to respond within a certain amount of time, or you get cited and fined for not doing that. All of these things can cost your company even more than you're paying for now. So your bottom line, really the supervising employer, the person who tells that employee what to do on a day-to-day basis, has the primary responsibility for the direct safety and well-being of the employees who report to their workplace. But as a company and as the employer of record for those employees, you are still involved because it's your company's workers' compensation insurance that suffers if the employees are not properly trained and informed. So you need to verify that those companies are providing training where it's in the contract for them to do it, or that you've done the appropriate training and information for that employee to make sure that they are safe in the workplace. So are there any questions that you have? And if so, please chat them into Alan, and he will communicate them to me. But in the interim, if you are interested in learning more about the Paychex HR services that include services like the safety service for each of our clients, please contact Paychex at www.paychex.com or call the 800-322-7292 number that's on your screen. So, Ellen, do we have any questions at this point?
Hi, everybody. This is Alan. I've been working here with Laurel on the presentation. Just kind of a housekeeping question on the slide deck information, and if the PowerPoint's going to be sent out to all of us here on the phone today. And Laurel, correct me if I'm wrong, that will be sent out, communicated out to our folks here on the phone?
As far as I know, it will be, yes.
Awesome. Okay, and actually, it looks like we have a good question coming in here. Let's see here. We have one that says they ask about all of the potential risks at our sites. And it continues on, what do our clients do with the information? So with the clients and prospect answers, how does the staffing firm know what to do with all of the answers? Do we record them? And if we monitor them, how do we do that? And also, when do we walk away from a customer? I know that's a lot to ask, but what are your thoughts?
Those are very good questions. Yes, absolutely. When you do monitor, or when you do ask the clients questions like, do you have cranes, do you have chemicals, and if so, what types of chemicals do you have, and what are they? You should definitely record the answers to that information, especially if it's in the positive. Yes, we do have this, and this is what the information is. We want to make sure that that you are aware of what your employees are being exposed to. So absolutely, you should write that information down and keep it, with the client file that you keep on that client. And then, if I'm not mistaken, the next question had to do with monitoring, and you should
Correct.
periodically walk through your client sites, or if you can't walk through physically, and look at the workplace to make sure that you're, that these types of things aren't being, brushed over. You should actually do something virtually. You can do a virtual walkthrough with them. You can, ask them to log in to FaceTime if you have an iPhone, or Skype if you've got an Android device, and they can walk through and show you right on their phone what their workplace looks like, or what specific, hazards or pieces of equipment look like, so you can get that information, and then, make sure that you write down what you're seeing, and do those periodic types of walkthroughs or monitoring to make sure that your employees are safe in the workplace. And also speak with your employees periodically. Have they brought in any new pieces of equipment? Are you uncomfortable with anything that they're asking you to do? That type of thing. So if you have that constant communication with your employees, that's going to help a lot. And then, when do you walk away from a customer? From an OSHA perspective, whenever your employees are exposed to a serious hazard that could bring them to serious harm, that employer is not willing to address. They're going to ask your employees to go into a trench or an excavation, where the sides of the trench or the excavation aren't protected, and a trench collapses happen all the time, and people die in those trenches. So there are requirements for those, side protection walls to be in place. And if they're not, then your employees don't go in there, and you walk away, because those people are asking your employees to do something that is dangerous to their life and health. If they're going to be asked to go up in an aerial lift, and they're not wearing a fall protection harness, or they're asked to to work on a construction site without hard hats or safety glasses, or they're being required to do something that again could bring them serious harm, that client of yours is not willing to address, then you need to get your employees out of there, because you don't want your employees to be exposed to that type of work environment. Again, would you let your child work there? Would you let your teenager or young adult work there? And if the answer is no, chances are you want to walk away.
Awesome. That's great. Looks like we had another question come in here. And the question was actually about regional laws for OSHA. Someone said they are looking to expand their business, and wanted to see, are there any variations in laws with OSHA throughout the country, or is it uniform, on a national level?
Okay, well, there's federal OSHA law, and that applies to every workplace in the company, except again those three: self-employed, farms that employ only immediate families, and whatever the third one was. But the OSHA regulations apply across the board. Now, again, different states have regulations that are much more stringent for certain topics. For example, Michigan, almost every regulation that's out there, Michigan has something that's more stringent than the federal OSHA regulations. Minnesota has a number of regulations. California has a number of regulations. So it's not regionally, it's state by state by state. So if your employees are going to be, you're on the border of a state, let's say Massachusetts and New York, and you're on that border, we need to make sure that if your employees are going into Massachusetts and they're going to be working on a municipal job site, that they have what's called a 10-hour safety training under the OSHA regulations, and so that that is required in the state of Massachusetts for any municipal construction type jobs. So again, there we go. There's a difference between New York and Massachusetts. I deal with Michigan, Minnesota, all the time, and those two states have a number of significant regulations that are different than the federal. Federal applies across the board, state by state for everything else.
Okay, that's great. It looks like that's all the questions that I saw come in.
All right, great. Well, I look forward to potentially working with any or all of you. Please feel free to get a hold of Paychex if you have any questions on our HR services packages and what we provide there. And I thank you so much, everyone, for your time and attention today.
Okay, thanks, everyone. Have a great day.